The galaxy had been watching the same show for 37 cycles, and nobody could remember a time before it existed. They called it Apex Reckoning, and it was the most popular entertainment program in 12 star systems. The premise was brutal. In its simplicity, take the deadliest creatures from conquered worlds and put them in a sealed chamber together. Let them fight until only one remains standing. The winner earned their species a temporary break from the harvesting ships that stripped planets of resources and people alike. Billions watched every broadcast. They watched from luxury stations, orbiting gas giants, and from slave quarters on mining colonies. They watched because they had no choice, and they watched because something deep inside every sentient being responded to the raw truth of survival. Director Krelvash had run the show for 11 cycles now, and he was very good at his job. His bioluminescent skin flickered with satisfaction as he reviewed the ratings. From the previous season, good numbers, but not great. The problem was predictability. The Vorthax won almost every single time. These 8-limbed nightmares had evolved on a death world where everything tried to kill everything else. They had armor made of chitin stronger than most metals. They had venom that could dissolve flesh in seconds. They had bladed limbs that could cut through starship hulls. Audiences knew what would happen before each broadcast even began. The Vorthax would slaughter everyone, and the credits would roll. Krelvash needed something new. He needed a twist that would bring viewers back to the edge of their seats. That was when the scout ships returned from a backwater system at the edge of explored space. They brought with them a creature nobody had ever seen before, a human. The lead scout announced during the species presentation meeting. Krelvash examined the holographic display rotating slowly in the center of the conference room. The creature was remarkably unremarkable. It stood on 2 legs with 2 arms hanging at its sides. No claws, no fangs, no armored plates or venomous spines. Its skin looked soft enough to tear with a casual swipe. "What does it do?" Krelvash asked. The scout shifted uncomfortably. "We are not entirely sure." "Director, explain. Their world is strange." "Sir." The scout pulled up additional data on the display. "The planet is covered mostly in water, which is toxic to most of our species. The atmosphere contains high levels of oxygen, which is combustible. The native life forms are numerous, and many of them are quite dangerous. Yet this species with no natural weapons has somehow become the dominant life form on the entire planet." Krelvash leaned forward with new interest. "How?" "Unknown." "Sir, they appear to use tools and work in groups, but individually, they seem to be no threat whatsoever." The other executives in the room began chittering with amusement. They saw what Krelvash saw: comedy relief. The human would enter the chamber and die in some entertaining fashion. The Vorthax would have fresh meat. Viewers would tune in just to see what this strange new creature would do before its inevitable end. "Perfect," Krelvash announced. "Ship it to the station immediately. We broadcast in 6 rotations." The human arrived 3 rotations later in a standard containment pod. Krelvash went to observe the intake process personally. He wanted to see this creature with his own eyes. The pod opened and the human stepped out. It was a female, according to the xenobiologist's average height for her species. Brown eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. Brown hair pulled back from her face. She wore the simple gray clothing all contestants received. Krelvash waited for the screaming to begin. Every new contestant screamed when they understood where they were. They begged and pleaded and threatened. It was part of the entertainment. The human did none of these things. She looked around the processing facility. With those brown eyes, she looked at the guards with their weapons drawn. She looked at the other contestants in their individual cells. She looked directly at Krelvash, and she simply walked to her assigned cell and sat down on the bench inside. No screaming, no begging, no threats. Just silence and those watching eyes. "Interesting," Krelvash muttered. One of his assistants leaned closer. "Sir, nothing. Put her in standard containment. Make sure she is fed and healthy for the broadcast. We want her to last at least a few minutes for the cameras." Over the next 6 rotations, Krelvash found himself returning to observe the human. He told himself it was professional interest. He told himself he was simply studying the new attraction. But something about the creature bothered him in a way he could not identify. She never paced her cell like the others. She never raged against the barriers. She never wept or prayed to whatever gods her species believed in. She sat. She watched. She studied every guard who passed. She observed every feeding time. She listened to every sound the station made. When other contestants were brought past her cell, she examined them with the same quiet intensity. The Vorthax in the cell across from her had killed 14 opponents in previous broadcasts. It spent its time sharpening its blade limbs against the reinforced walls. The human watched it for hours. She watched how it moved and how it rested. She watched what made it angry and what made it calm. The Vorthax noticed her watching and pressed against its barrier with a threatening hiss. The human did not flinch. She simply tilted her head slightly as if filing away new information. "What are you?" Krelvash whispered to himself. As he watched the security feeds, the night before the broadcast, he reviewed the betting odds. The Vorthax was favored to win at 1-3. The Krillian Berserker came second at 5-1. The Shade Wraith, with its ability to phase through solid matter, was listed at 8-1. The human was listed at 500-1. Those were the longest odds in the history of the program. Krelvash approved a final broadcast schedule and retired to his quarters. Tomorrow would bring excellent ratings. The strange soft creature would die, and the Vorthax would reign supreme once again. Everything would proceed exactly as expected. That was what Krelvash told himself as he drifted into sleep. But somewhere deep in his ancient brain, a small voice whispered a warning. He dreamed of brown eyes watching him from the darkness. He dreamed of something patient and quiet, waiting for the perfect moment. When he woke the next morning, he could not remember the dreams. He only knew that for the first time in 11 cycles, he felt something unfamiliar. It took him several minutes to identify the sensation. It was unease. He pushed the feeling aside and prepared for the broadcast. After all, what could one soft, weaponless creature possibly do against the deadliest killers in the galaxy? The kill chamber was a masterpiece of death. Engineers had spent decades perfecting its design 50 meters across in a perfect circle. The floor was made of gray metal scarred by countless battles. Scattered throughout were obstacles meant to create drama, broken pillars that provided temporary cover, shallow pools of liquid that reflected the harsh lights above, elevated platforms that gave advantage to those quick enough to claim them. The walls rose 20 meters high and were made of reinforced neutronium. Nothing had ever damaged them. Nothing had ever escaped. 3,000 micro cameras lined every surface. They captured every angle in perfect detail. They zoomed in on killing blows and final breaths. They showed the galaxy exactly what happened when apex predators met in confined space above. The chamber sat the observation deck where Director Krelvash and his team monitored everything. Below them, the 7 doors waited to release 7 contestants. Only one would walk out alive. The broadcast began with the traditional introduction. Holographic displays appeared across 12 star systems. Billions of viewers settled in to watch. "Welcome to Apex Reckoning," the AI announcer declared in its smooth synthetic voice. "Tonight, we bring you 7 of the deadliest creatures in the known galaxy. Only one will survive. Only one will earn mercy for their species. Let the reckoning begin." The first door opened, and the Vorthax entered. 8 limbs carried its massive form. Into the chamber, chitin armor gleamed under the lights. Its mandibles dripped with venom that sizzled when it hit the floor. The crowd roared with approval across 1,000 worlds. This was the champion. This was Death Incarnate. The second door opened for the Krillian Berserker, all muscle and rage packed into a frame 3 meters tall. Its species felt no pain, and knew no fear. They only knew the joy of combat and the pleasure of destruction. Door 3 released the Shade Wraith. It flickered into existence like a bad dream. Its body was barely visible and seemed to shift between solid and transparent. It could phase through matter itself. Nothing could hold it, and nothing could harm it while it was phased. The Thornback came through. Door 4. Every centimeter of its body was covered in spines. Each spine carried poison that caused paralysis, followed by slow, agonizing death. It had no eyes, but it could sense movement through vibrations in the air. Door 5 brought the Mindripper. Psychic tendrils extended from its bulbous head. It did not need to touch its victims. It simply reached into their minds and shattered their sanity. Those it did not kill outright became puppets dancing to its will. The Goroth stomped through door 6, 12 feet of scaled muscle and fury. Its species had evolved on a high-gravity world. Every movement carried the force of a freight transport. A single blow from its fists could crush armor plate. Then door 7 opened. The human walked out. She was so small compared to the others, so fragile looking in her simple gray clothing. She had no weapons because contestants were not allowed weapons. She had no armor because her species did not grow any. She had nothing but her soft skin and her brown watching eyes. The galaxy laughed. Billions of viewers made jokes about the tiny creature. Betting sites saw a surge of wagers against her survival past the first minute on the observation deck. Krelvash allowed himself a smile. This would be entertaining indeed. The 7 contestants spread out through the chamber. Standard behavior for the opening moments. The predators circled the edges, sizing each other up. They identified threats and calculated which opponent to target first. The smart ones waited for others to fight and weaken each other. The human did something unexpected. She walked directly to the center of the chamber. She stood there in the open, with no cover and no protection. She made herself the most obvious target. In the room, "What is she doing?" one of the analysts asked. "Suicide," another answered with a laugh. "She knows she cannot win, so she wants a quick death." Krelvash was not so sure. He watched those brown eyes move from creature to creature. She was not waiting to die. She was watching, she was calculating. The Thornback moved first. It sensed the small, soft creature standing alone and saw easy prey. One of its spines launched through the air with deadly accuracy. The spine flew toward the human's unprotected back. She was not there. The movement was so fast and so subtle that the cameras barely caught it. One moment she stood in the path of the spine. The next moment she had stepped aside with centimeters to spare. The spine continued on its path and embedded itself in the Shade Wraith's torso. The Wraith shrieked in pain and surprise. It had been phased and intangible. Nothing should have been able to harm it. But the Thornback's spines carried a unique property. They existed partially out of phase with normal matter. The Wraith's own defense had betrayed it. Panicked and in agony, the Wraith phased completely and fled. It materialized directly in the space the Goroth occupied. 2 bodies cannot exist in the same space. At the same time, the Goroth roared and swung with instinct alone. Its massive fist connected with the Wraith's head. The Wraith's head separated from its body and rolled across the chamber floor. 2 contestants eliminated in 4 seconds. The human had not lifted a finger. She simply stood there in the center of the chamber, with those brown eyes watching Krelvash lean forward in his chair. "Replay that," he ordered. The technicians rewound the footage and played it in slow motion. The human had seen the Thornback preparing to fire. She had positioned herself precisely between the Thornback and the Thiever Wraith. She had calculated the exact angle and the exact timing. She had moved at the last possible moment, knowing the spine would hit the Wraith. She had known the Wraith would panic and phase. She had known where the Goroth was standing. 4 seconds of chaos that looked like accident, but was anything but. "That was not luck," Krelvash whispered. On the chamber floor, the human smiled. It was a small smile barely visible to the cameras, but Krelvash saw it, and for the first time in his long career, he felt a chill run down his spine. 5 killers remained in the chamber, and the galaxy was no longer laughing. The human moved through the chaos like water flowing around stones. She never ran. She never attacked. She simply walked with calm purpose while death swirled around her. The Corellian berserker had fixed its attention on her after the first 2 deaths. It charged with the fury of its kind, 3 meters of muscle and rage coming at her like a living missile. She sidestepped at the last moment, and the berserker crashed into one of the broken pillars. Enraged, it spun and charged again. Again, she was not there. Again and again it attacked, and again it found only empty air. The berserker grew more furious with each failed attempt. Its species was not built for patience. They were built for overwhelming force and quick victories. The human was denying it the satisfaction of contact. On the observation deck, Director Krelvash watched with growing unease. "She is not fighting," the senior analyst observed. "She is not even defending in any traditional sense." "What would you call it then?" Krelvash asked. The analyst studied the footage for a long moment. "Manipulation," she finally answered. "She is manipulating their positions. She is hurting them. Like livestock." Krelvash felt that chill again. He looked at the chamber layout and suddenly saw what the analyst meant. The human's seemingly random movements had a pattern. She was drawing the berserker toward the Mindripper. She was putting the Thornback between herself and the Vorthax. She was creating collisions that had not happened yet. How? Krelvash demanded. How can she possibly predict where each creature will move? Nobody had an answer. The Mindripper decided to end game with the soft creature's psychic tendrils extended from its bulbous head and reached for the human's mind. It had shattered 1,000 minds before. It had broken warriors and scientists and leaders of worlds. One small human would be nothing. The tendrils touched her thoughts and found something unexpected. Her mind was not empty or weak. Her mind was a maze of patterns and predictions. It calculated angles and distances and probabilities. It ran scenarios faster than the Mindripper could. It held memories of a species that had spent millions of years as both hunter and hunted. A species that had learned to read the movements of predators before they struck. A species that had survived not through strength, but through understanding. The Mindripper recoiled in confusion. This creature's brain should not work this way. No species in the galaxy had evolved such intense predictive capabilities. The human turned to look directly at the Mindripper. She smiled again. That smile appeared on 4 billion screens across 12 star systems. Something in that expression made ancient predators feel a sensation they had never experienced before. They felt like prey. The Corellian berserker finally lost all control of its rage. It could not catch the small creature, no matter how hard it tried. Its tiny brain could not process this failure. It needed to kill something. It needed to feel bones break and flesh tear. The Mindripper was the closest target. The berserker slammed into the psychic creature with the force of a small explosion. The Mindripper tried to seize its mind, but the berserker had no mind to seize. It operated on pure instinct, and Fury's psychic tendrils could find no purchase on something so simple and so savage. They died together in a tangle of limbs and screams. The berserker crushed the Mindripper's skull with its bare hands, but the Mindripper's death spasm sent a psychic pulse that stopped the berserker's heart. 3 more dead. The human had not thrown a single punch. She stood among the corpses watching the Thornback and the Vorthax. Viewership had climbed to 9 billion. Nobody in the galaxy was laughing anymore. The Thornback launched a volley of spines at the human. She moved through them like a dancer. Each step placed her exactly where a spine was not. Each turn brought her closer to the Thornback itself. The creature began to panic. It had never missed this many times. It had never faced prey that could read its attacks before they happened. It backed away and fired more spines with desperate speed. The human caught one of the spines out of the air. She held it delicately between 2 fingers. The Thornback froze. No creature had ever caught its spines before. No creature had ever been fast enough or brave enough to try. The human examined the spine with curiosity. She noted the barbed tip and the hollow channel that delivered poison. She saw how the base connected to the thornback's body. She understood everything about the weapon. In a single glance, then she tucked the spine into her clothing and continued walking. The thornback fired every spine it had. The human avoided them all. When the creature was empty and defenseless, she simply walked past it. She walked past it toward the Vorthax. The thornback turned to flee and found the Vorthax blocking its path. The champion had grown tired of waiting. It wanted to kill something, and the thornback was the closest target. Bladed limbs flashed, and the thornback fell in pieces. The Vorthax stood over its kill and roared in triumph. It turned to face the human. Two remained: the soft, weaponless creature and the perfect killing machine. Every viewer in the galaxy leaned forward. This was the moment they had been waiting for. This was the end. The human stood perfectly still. She looked at the Vorthax with those brown, watching eyes. She was not afraid. She was ready. She had been ready since the moment she walked into the chamber. Everything until now had been preparation. Everything until now had been setting the stage. The real contest was about to begin. 800 million years of evolution had shaped the Vorthax into the perfect predator. Every generation had been a war for survival on a world where weakness meant death. The weak died young. The strong grew stronger. Over countless cycles of violence and natural selection, the Vorthax became something terrifying. They had armor that could stop projectile weapons. They had venom that could dissolve metal. They had 8 limbs, each ending in blades sharper than surgical tools. They had senses that could detect prey through walls and across vast distances. They had never encountered something they could not kill. In 937 previous combat encounters, this particular Vorthax had never lost. It had killed creatures 10 times its size. It had killed creatures that could breathe fire and creatures that could turn invisible. It had killed psychics and berserkers and things that had no name in any language. Now it faced a small, soft human with no weapons and no armor. The outcome should have been certain. The Vorthax circled slowly. It was in no hurry. It had learned over many battles that patience often revealed weakness in prey. Some creatures would break and run. Some would attack in desperation. Some would try to negotiate or beg. The human did none of these things. She stood in the center of the chamber, exactly where she had stood when the contest began. Her brown eyes tracked the Vorthax's movements with calm attention. Her breathing was slow and steady. Her body was relaxed, but ready. She looked like someone waiting for a transport, rather than someone facing certain death. The Vorthax found this disturbing. Prey was supposed to fear. Prey was supposed to tremble and leak stress hormones that made the hunt more satisfying. This creature showed no fear at all on the observation deck. Director Krelvash stared at the screens with growing frustration. "Attack her," he shouted, even though the Vorthax could not hear him. "She is nothing. She is nothing." His staff exchanged worried glances. They had never seen the director lose his composure. They had never seen anyone react to a contestant this way. 9 billion viewers watched in silence. The entire galaxy held its breath. The Vorthax made its decision. It would not play games with this strange creature. It would end this quickly and claim its victory. 8 limbs drove it forward with explosive speed. Bladed appendages swept in from multiple angles. Venomous mandibles opened wide to deliver the killing bite. The attack was perfect. It covered every possible escape route. It came from above and below and both sides simultaneously. No creature in the galaxy could have avoided it. The human dropped to the ground. She did not dive or roll or leap. She simply folded her legs and fell straight down. The Vorthax's blades passed through the space where she had been. Its momentum carried it over her falling body. Before it could adjust, she was behind it. She rose smoothly with something in her hand. The thornback spine, she had kept it hidden in her clothing. She had waited for exactly this moment. The Vorthax spun to face her, but it was already too late. Her arm moved with precision that spoke of long practice. The spine entered the soft spot beneath the creature's third left limb. That spot was a closely guarded secret of Vorthax anatomy. Their sensory cluster was located there. It was the one place their armor did not fully protect. It was the one vulnerability in their perfect design. Only someone who had watched and studied and analyzed would know it existed. Only someone who had spent 6 days observing a Vorthax in the cell across from hers. The poison flooded the Vorthax's system. It tried to swing at her butt. Its limbs would not respond. It tried to bite her, but its mandibles locked in place. It crashed to the ground with a sound like thunder. The human stepped back and watched it die. She did not gloat or celebrate. She simply watched with those brown eyes as the greatest killer in the galaxy twitched and fell still. The chamber was silent. The observation deck was silent. 9 billion viewers across 12 star systems sat in stunned disbelief. The human stood alone in a room full of bodies. She looked up at the nearest camera. She knew exactly where it was. She had known where every camera was since the moment she entered. "My species has a saying," she said. Her voice was calm and clear. It carried across the chamber and across the galaxy. "We did not claw our way to the top of our food chain. We thought our way there." She smiled that small, dangerous smile. "Your move." The message was not for Director Krulvash. It was not for the entertainment network or its executives. It was for every slave watching from every conquered world. It was for every species that had been told they were inferior. It was for every creature that had given up hope. You do not need to be the strongest to win. You do not need claws or venom or armor. You need only to think. You need only to watch and learn and wait for the right moment. The human had just proven that the mightiest empire in the galaxy could be beaten. All it took was patience and intelligence, and humanity had plenty of both. Director Krulvash could not move. He sat in his command chair, staring at the screens, while his mind struggled to process what he had witnessed. The viewership counter continued to climb 9.2 billion, now 9.510 billion. The highest numbers in the history of the collective entertainment network. The highest numbers in the history of any broadcast anywhere. And the human was still talking. She had sat down cross-legged in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the bodies of 6 apex predators. She looked directly into the cameras and spoke in that calm, clear voice. She was explaining. She was teaching the Vorthax attacks in predictable patterns, she said. Left blade first, then right, then the paired strikes from the secondary limbs. Once you understand the pattern, you can anticipate every move. She gestured at the fallen thornback. That one fires spines in clusters of 3. The first 2 are meant to make you dodge into the path of the third. Stand still and let the first 2 pass, then step forward. The third will miss behind you. She pointed at the Mindraper's corpse. Psychics need a moment to establish connection. Disrupt their concentration before that moment, and they cannot hold you. Any strong emotion will do. Surprise works best. Director Krulvash finally found his voice. Cut the feed. The broadcast technician looked at him with shock. Sir, the ratings are unprecedented. We have never had numbers like this. The advertising revenue alone will fund operations for. Cut the feed. Krulvash was standing now. His bioluminescent skin flickered with colors that indicated extreme agitation. She is teaching them how to kill us. She is showing every slave in the Empire how to fight back. Cut the feed now. The technician's hands moved over the controls. Screens across the galaxy went dark. 10 billion viewers suddenly found themselves staring at nothing, but it was too late. The human had been talking. For nearly 4 minutes, 4 minutes of detailed tactical analysis broadcast to every corner of civilized space. 4 minutes of hope delivered to species that had forgotten what hope felt like. The message was out. It could not be taken back in. The chamber the human stood up when the cameras went dark. She knew what had happened. She had expected it to happen sooner. She walked to the winner's exit and waited patiently. The rules of Apex Reckoning were sacred. The winner must be released. The winner's species must receive their promised reprieve. Not even the collective itself could change these rules. They were built into the foundation of the Empire's social contract. If the rules could be broken, then nothing else could be trusted. The door opened. Guards with weapons stood in the corridor. Beyond, Director Krelvash stood among them. His skin still flickered with agitation, but he had regained some composure. "You planned this," he said. It was not a question. The human tilted her head slightly. "You brought me here. You put me in a cell across from a vortex for 6 days. You gave me time to watch and learn. What did you think would happen? You should have killed you the moment you arrived." The human smiled that small, dangerous smile. "But you did not, because your rules said you could not. And now your rules say you must let me go." Krelvash wanted to order the guards to fire. He wanted to end this strange creature and pretend none of this had happened. But the cameras were still recording for archival purposes. Other executives were watching from remote locations. The rules were sacred. He stepped aside. The human walked past him without fear. She walked down the corridor toward the shuttle bay. She walked off the station and into the black between stars. The collective spent the next 3 cycles debating what to do about the human broadcast. Some wanted to suppress it completely. Others argued that attempting to suppress it would only spread it further. In the end, they did nothing. It was a mistake. The first uprising began on a mining colony called Drevis 7. A Thornback overseer was killed by workers who had learned how to avoid its spines. They stood still and let the first 2 pass, then stepped forward. The third missed behind them. Word spread through slave networks across the Empire. More uprisings followed. On world after world, the conquered began to fight back. They used the tactics the human had taught them. They watched their oppressors and learned their patterns. They waited for the right moments and struck with precision. The collective responded with overwhelming force. But overwhelming force requires soldiers who were increasingly reluctant to face enemies who seemed to know their every move. The human herself was never found. She had disappeared into the vast darkness between systems. Rumors said she had returned to her homeworld. Others said she had joined the growing resistance. Some claimed she had never been a prisoner at all. They said she had allowed herself to be captured. They said the whole thing had been planned from the beginning. They said the whole thing had been being single human sacrificing herself to light a fire across the galaxy. Nobody knew for certain. But every few cycles, a resistance cell somewhere would receive an anonymous data package. Inside would be tactical analysis of their local oppressors, detailed breakdowns of patrol patterns and security weaknesses, strategic plans that accounted for every variable. The packages were never signed. They did not need to be. Everyone knew who sent them. Years passed, and the uprisings continued to spread. The collective entertainment network tried to resume Apex Reckoning. Nobody watched. The magic was gone. Everyone had seen what a soft, weaponless creature could do against the deadliest killers in the galaxy. Everyone had learned the lesson. The human had taught, you do not need claws to win. You do not need venom or armor or overwhelming strength. You need only a mind that watches and learns and waits. Humanity had plenty of minds like that. And now the galaxy knew it. Director Krelvash retired from the network after the 5th uprising. He spent his remaining years in a secure compound far from any contested space. He never watched combat entertainment again. Sometimes at night he would wake from dreams he could not remember. Dreams of brown eyes watching him from the darkness. Dreams of something patient and quiet that had been waiting for this moment since before his species had learned to walk upright. In his final days, he sometimes wondered if the human had known. If somehow she had seen the future and planned for it. If her species could think that far ahead. He never got an answer. But deep in his hearts, he suspected the truth. Humans did not climb to the top of their food chain by accident. They had thought their way there, and now they were thinking their way across the stars. The cameras had cut first, but the lesson had already been taught. The galaxy would never be the same.